Koffin-K in TS Underswap has cemented himself as a new fan favorite for many people, due to his presence in the game. Although even before the second demo officially released, Koffin-K has made some appearances during development. The first paid showcase of Koffin-K's character came on Halloween of 2021, with a character demonstration video for Koffin-K. This video portrayed him as an eccentric and diabolical villain attempting to keep you in his domain forever. From that point, Koffin-K was occasionally present in Undertale OC tournaments and preview images. His complete character, however, was only shown when TS Underswap released its second demo. Unlike my Kara analysis, where I discussed a more underappreciated and misunderstood character, I want to shine light on a character who's already appreciated, and hopefully reveal some of the deeper depths of his writing by examining Koffin-K's appearances within the game. Before even meeting Koffin-K, there's a few allusions to his character. If you use the cell phone, you can call Koffin-K at the beginning of Starlight Isles, in which he's trying to out-prank the caller by throwing out his refrigerator, before being shocked that someone else called. Given the fact he calls his phone a Sans receiver in a later call, it's safe to assume that this is Sans. This detail implies that he has no one else to talk to, which alludes to the main conflict of his arc. Koffin-K is also sporadically foreshadowed throughout Starlight Isles. Larry initially mentions that the Count wants to make bank off of the crystal, and he's also shown on a poster in that same room labeled as a malefactor. This villainous depiction of the Count as just a criminal we're given so far is added to with the telescope preview showing his shadowed visage. This impression is also subverted though, with actions like Crossbones and Koffin-K defacing each other's posters with mustache graffiti. When you finally meet him properly, he introduces himself by altering his and Mad Dummy's deal with the human, citing that he could do so due to his status as the supervillain. This scene becomes more interesting later, but for now you're shown a seemingly cunning and evil villain, and this notion seems further reinforced when you're made a spooky servant by him and forced to complete his servant duties. The Koffin Keep area is when focus starts being placed more on Koffin-K himself, since he owns the area, and because of that, some trinkets of characterization can be found here. For starters, the grand scale of the keep itself helps illustrate that Koffin-K is likely pretty wealthy. The castle's previous caretaker even mentions that Koffin-K paid an extraordinary amount for restoration efforts for the castle, along with the fact that he chose a very specific list of residents for the keep. Based on another resident's dialogue, we can see that he's hiring for pretty unusual reasons, such as wanting the shark NPC because all supervillain layers need a shark. With this dialogue, along with the fact that he has books for practicing his evil laugh, shows that he seemingly values his supervillain identity. There are also other details about Koffin-K you can find in the keep, such as his general spite towards Crossbones, or how he's kept a detailed record of Koffin Keep's history that extends for 28 or so volumes. While completing the servant duties that Koffin-K has assigned Kara, you'll have to give the servant items to Koffin-K along the way. You always have to go up to meet Koffin-K in his study, and Larry specifically mentions that he likes it up there. Given that his study has a pipe organ, which is later described to have an open skylight built into the ceiling so that everyone could hear him, it seems that he's somewhat reclusive even in his own castle. Once you finish all of Koffin-K's servant duties, Koffin-K seems to place a lot of emphasis on Kara's loyalty for Koffin-K. The final task given, where Kara has to fight Harry and Larry, also shows the duo trying to assert their loyalty to Koffin-K. Considering this is prominent in Koffin-K's main servants, loyalty is a trait that Koffin-K seems to highly value. The end of Harry and Larry's battle also shows that Koffin-K is still able to help resolve Larry and Harry's main conflict, by telling them what they needed to hear about how useful they actually are, even if it's in his own Koffin-K way. The diner section also elaborates and expands on Koffin-K's key characterization. Firstly, we're more thoroughly introduced to his silliness, with his evil plan revolving around stealing the crown jewel during the Guiding Light Festival, while not even knowing what the crown jewel looks like, or when the Guiding Light Festival actually starts. Koffin-K's desire for attention and to feel important is also alluded to here in this scene. To deflect against not knowing when the Guiding Light Festival actually started, he asserts that there's no actual fun with the festival until he specifically is there. His entire plan itself revolves around stealing the crown jewel so that the people in Guiding Light have to go to the Koffin Keep, which honestly is the epitome of attention seeking. During this section, Koffin-K will also ask you about the quality of his evil plan, and a similar question for Koffin-K appears earlier about the Koffin Keep as a whole. Interestingly enough though, regardless of your response, Koffin-K will interpret your answers in a positive way. which may imply that Koffin-K is seeking Kara's positive reception specifically. An easy thing to gloss over is how all of the people Koffin-K has hired reacts to his speech. No one says or asks anything during his speech, besides someone asking where the refreshments are. And when Koffin-K's speech is over, a lot of them seem pretty disinterested, while other residents are just concerned with what Koffin-K is planning. One of the residents leaving the speech is even rooting for Crossbones to win. After everyone leaves the diner, Koffin-K ends up as a companion with Kara. And if touring the Koffin Keep with him reinforces anything about him, it's that he's a silly goober. There's funny interactions with Koffin-K, like how he states that he's been throwing Harry and Larry in the washing machine, along with how he apparently had to rebuild the entire castle a few times for a prank that he only found funny the first couple of times. While exploring the keep with him, there's also more elaboration given on how he hired residents for the keep. Koffin-K seems to want residents more for aesthetic purposes than for any practical reasons. He hired certain residents purely for decor for the aquarium, or others just to run in the halls. He even raised the pay for some residents for these unusual tasks. We also get a further glimpse of how his own residents feel about Koffin-K, or just being in the keep in general. The Shark NPC's interactions shows how some of the residents don't even go to the meetings Koffin-K typically has, and others just seem like they're there at the Koffin Keep for the practically free money. Certain NPCs in the keep just seem to dislike Koffin-K as well, such as the mole NPC. Eventually though, Kara and Koffin-K will move on to Starstruck Village in order to complete Koffin-K's plan. Once Kara and Koffin-K head to Starstruck Village, the main thing we can glean about him in relation to Kara is his value on them following his evil plans. But he also shows genuine care for Kara. Koffin-K's dialogue after the Stargaze memory most evidently shows how he cares about Kara, even if he tries to mask it under his supervillain personality. You can actually learn a lot about Koffin-K through the interactions of the Starstruck Village. For example, Koffin-K seems to have a passing interest in music, or at the very least seems somewhat knowledgeable on the topic. He mentions having an instrument of destruction and wanting an instrument of chaos, along with how he accurately points out that if he wanted an instrument to make destructive noises, then a vuvuzela is a good choice. Especially given the pipe organ in his study, it's an intriguing detail about his character. He also seems to take great pride in his laughter, even demeaning Woodwork's amateur laugh. Given that he likely practiced for this evil laugh, his pride in it displays how important it actually is to him. Beyond just characterization though, Koffin-K also has some interesting lore connections. This is mostly shown with his connection to the mysterious door person that squatted in his basement. On a somewhat unrelated note though, a question that I pondered for a while with Koffin-K is why did he take such a strong interest in Kara to begin with, even going as far as to form a deal with Mad Dummy in order to capture them as his spooky servant. As far as I'm aware, there's no explicit answer in the game for this. Of course, the obvious answer is simply that Kara is a human, but I've saved this question for this section because I believe the Starstruck Village section may provide a more interesting interpretation for this answer. For some context though, many interactions in this area show how Koffin-K is pretty negatively received by most of the locals. Betty, the bee shopkeeper for this area, talks about how Koffin-K is just a nuisance for the village and for the Navy. He has wanted posters in Starstruck Village and outside of it, and he's apparently even been kicked out of the inn in Starstruck Village 28 times. And once Koffin-K is around as a pseudo-party member, he quickly overrides half of the game's mechanics with his presence. He'll override encounters, your equipment, the journal, along with carrying most of the game's narration on his spine. Despite how much he places importance on his plans in Kara's life though, he never forces them to do them, and if Kara doesn't engage with his schemes, he doesn't give much pushback. He'll even get impatient pretty quickly for his own schemes, like how he abandoned the banana peel after he realized he had to wait for someone to slip on it. Although I think Koffin-K is probably somewhat impatient in general, I also think that a lot of this behavior could stem from him trying to maximize the fun out of his and Kara's interactions, so that he could befriend Kara better. This may also explain moments where Koffin-K disallows certain activities like going to the library or sleeping on the bench. Considering that Kara is a human, and therefore not a monster local to the underground or Starstruck Village who's mostly fed up with him, he likely tries to bond more with Kara due to them not already being biased against him like most monsters are. His battle also emphasizes specifically that Kara being a human willing to do their laundry was too good to be true. Like he was hoping that Kara being a human specifically made them different from other monsters in how they approached him. Speaking of the battle though, Before the battle against Koffin-K begins though, there's an interesting parallel made with his first appearance. In Koffin-K's first appearance, he pulls a double crossing on Madhouse, and in this encounter, he preemptively labels Kara's opposition as a double crossing. His behavior seems somewhat akin to Suzy and Deltarune actually, with him being perceived negatively by others and thus quick to assume others are out to get him as a result. The way he quickly turns against Kara and rationalizes their actions with his bravado implies him being highly insecure, but trying to stay emotionally guarded against Kara. Once the battle begins though, Koffin-K is able to quickly spin the narrative that Kara was an agent of Crossbones, and that they were secretly working together, which again is likely him using his supervillain persona to avoid actually being vulnerable. This may also tie into the fact that he's bordering on being a fanfic writer, and will be able to create these convoluted narratives. But there's more in that regard later in this analysis. An interesting detail to look over though are the game overs you can get in this fight, which give us a brief glimpse into his reactions after Kara dies. Some of the game overs showcase him pleading for Kara to wake up, trying to encourage this for the good times they had, or just begging Kara to prove him wrong. Others show the monsters around seemingly reacting negatively to Koffin-K, and there's even an ending where he's implied to be getting detained for killing Kara. On the topic of dying during this fight, if you die twice in this fight during the cutscene before the battle, he'll say, but as the translation note in the localization file itself correctly points out, eliminary is not a real word, but Koffin-K thinks it's a fancy way of saying eliminating. I think this is a funny scene, but it's also a prime example of how Koffin-K himself probably doesn't know what half the phrases and words he's saying in his grandiose speeches actually mean. Getting back on track with the actual battle though, throughout the fight, Kara is tasked with reminding Koffin-K of their time together, and convincing them that they actually cared about him. An intriguing part of this battle though, is that whether you engage with Koffin-K's schemes or completed the servant duties in the good or evil way, the outcome of the battle and the resolution of the Koffin-K's arc is still the same. There's obvious game design reasons for this, but I also think it highlights what's actually important in this conflict, because ultimately, what resolves this conflict is Kara being honest about how they feel. Regardless of how Kara engaged with Koffin-K, they express their genuine and honest feelings about him. And when you look at everyone else Koffin-K has a connection with, no one has ever really been honest to Koffin-K in this way. Harry and Larry's conflict in the Evacuation Route centers on them trying to assert who's more useful to him. Crossbones also just seems to engage in silly shenanigans with him over anything else, and everyone else just seems to have a negative perception of him. Starstruck Village's locals in general don't seem to like him, and not even his own residents in the keep seem to care much. Above all, nowhere in the game does anyone bluntly tell Koffin-K how they feel, given how most monsters bring him up while talking to Kara. The impact of Kara's openness to Koffin-K is strongly shown on him, because even though he initially tries to deny what Kara is saying, he eventually cries, betraying the supervillain persona he's built up for himself. Before that scene though, there's actually a few variations of his speech. If you win through force, he puts on his act for far longer, and isn't moved by anything Kara said because they haven't said anything at all. If you engage with most of Koffin-K's schemes, he attempts to use his identity as a supervillain to deflect from his problems, and that he pays his Koffin Keep residents just to stick around. The most fascinating variant though is if you don't engage with most of his schemes. He tries to justify how he treats the local monsters in the village because he wants to be remembered, and that he has to beg them to not run away. These two variations in particular highly emphasize Koffin-K's loneliness, and shows that he knows the supervillain persona is driving others away. He compensates by paying others to be around him, or just begging them not to run away so that he's known for something. By the end of his fight, a lot of his main internal conflict is resolved, as he vows to try to befriend the locals from this point onwards, rather than causing trouble and portraying himself in an unlikable way. Depending on how you proceed through the rest of the game, this event could be Koffin-K's last appearance in the Evacuation Route, but he can make a few more appearances in this route. If you lose to Crossbones, you can see Koffin-K will put in the punishment jack, and if you lose enough times, he'll even offer advice for you to go back and get healing items from Muffet. He also makes a more prominent appearance in Sans' actual hangout, which has some interesting scenes. When Sans offers a race, he tries to adamantly insist that his and Crossbones' rivalries in the past, but gets reinvigorated for the race. It's played off very comedically, but it still shows how Koffin-K's current games of Crossbones are ultimately fun and harmless, even if Koffin-K tries to initially move on from it. In general, the lesson that Koffin-K needs to learn here isn't that his goofy personality is a bad thing. just that he could do so without causing any harm or being annoying to others, as Kara themselves points out at the end of his fight. Now then, the next section of the script is mostly speculation on my part, but since TS Underswap is currently in development, a natural question to consider is how Koffin-K may develop in the future. I'm unsure as to if he'll return as a main player in the main content in the future, but I could see him making some brief appearances, or having extra content that further fleshes him out. Currently, I think the best thing that can be done with Koffin-K is for him to follow through on what he promised. Or in other words, I hope we get to see him more directly interact with Starstruck Village's locals, or just other monsters in general. I do think Koffin-K making a more major appearance in the future could further expand upon his other flaws, and begin to resolve them. For example, Koffin-K is shown to be pretty obsessive towards Crossbones, almost to an extreme degree I'd argue. I normally analyze this under queer theory, and although I personally don't think he's straight, I think much of this obsession comes down to the fact that he has no other connections. Especially given how this obsession Koffin-K has is seen with Kara to an extent, with how they take over many elements of the game and the narrative. Koffin-K also just seems to have a tendency to take certain inconveniences or conflicts extremely personally. Given his backstory, it's a decent argument, although we'll get to that shortly. Regardless, I think this is a part of his character he could grow from by forming a larger network of connections, and to be less obsessive over the connections he's already formed. I can honestly see it going in a few ways. If Koffin-K makes more minor appearances in the future, I can see him having some interactions if he backtracks to Starstruck Village. Or alternatively, he may show up more prominently in the main story for a brief time. He's not exactly set up to be a major recurring character like the Pirates, so I'm not expecting too much. Koffin-K's past is somewhat hidden, but you can find his first main backstory in his study, and I'll summarize it briefly here in case you missed it. He opened the Cappy comic store in Starstruck Village, in which he'd sell comics that humans threw out. Business looked successful for Koffin-K until Crossbones' comics began to take off, which caused business to dwindle. He still had one regular though, and with that regular, they discussed how Crossbones had no actual villains. It's never explicitly stated who that regular customer was, but given the fact that there's a drawing of Koffin-K in his study signed by Susie, there's a decent chance that Susie might have been this regular. From this point on, Koffin-K wrote out the details for a new villain which would help fix Crossbones' comics, but a coffee stain unfortunately ruined the backstory while he was typing it out. This backstory is pretty goofy, but it also prominently displays his obsessive nature towards things that are inconvenient. We can see this trait of taking inconveniences personally in other places in the game, like of how he wants to build his own ring toss game after seeing that the festival's ring toss game has no one manning the booth. His backstory shows an insane obsession though. This villain write-up Koffin-K had is approximately 1,814 pages long. He had a costume made for it, and bought an entire castle for it. He even altered his behavior to fit, like with how he changed his laugh to sound more evil. Although it's neat how Koffin-K feels about his old laugh compared to his new one. Koffin-K describes his old laugh as being embarrassing to write out, whereas his new laughter is something that he enjoys writing out. This contrast shows that although some of his supervillain quirks may be to guard himself, his general way of self-expression is just how he feels best expressing himself. Getting back to the length of Koffin-K's villain write-up though, it's basically confirmed that he's an avid fanfiction writer. Flowey will mention that in a specific interaction that Koffin-K is practicing calligraphy for his new fanfiction, and there's also an interaction in which Koffin-K will accidentally refer to his autobiography as a novel. Koffin-K's backstory alone isn't the most revealing, but it does expand on some of his already existing characterization. Koffin-K also has an additional backstory though, showing how he hired Harry and Larry as his minions. Despite how Koffin-K frames the hiring process as a complex screening process before we see the backstory, in the backstory itself he directly tells Harry and Larry that he has no one else, which further emphasizes his loneliness. It's interesting how this highlights Koffin-K's hiring process, since he seems to be more interested in more abstract quirks for his minions. With Harry and Larry, he hires based on things like their names rhyming, them being a short and tall duo, and Harry being able to snap his fingers, as an example. He apparently even had resumes for actual assassins to look through, who were probably actually skilled and far more practical, but rejected them off of being average height. Considering how he's hired people to run in the hallways or to watch Jeremy, it's an oddly consistent trend with his character, indicating he's more interested in sillier people. If there's any aspect of Koffin-K's character that is the most underappreciated, it's definitely his appearance in the Ruthless and Evacuation Route. On a surface level, it's easy to write off his presence in the route, since there's only one mandatory encounter with him, but I personally find Koffin-K's character to be fascinating here. His first appearance in this route starts off similarly to the main route, but due to Kara's presence scaring Koffin-K, he hastily tells them to leave. This encounter alone does not show us much, but it does allude to the fact that Koffin-K seems to be blissful of the underground's current predicament, given how he still tries to make them a spooky servant. For most, I imagine this encounter is likely all that'll be seen. However, Koffin-K can actually make a second appearance in this route. If you abort the roofless route at Crossbones and backtrack to the Ferris wheel, Koffin-K will be there. Koffin-K attempts to steal the crown jewel, but stops when he realizes that no one else is there. He's shown to be extremely ignorant of the underground situation, assuming everyone else to be at some sort of party. On a surface level, this interaction seems to show Koffin-K as someone who's naive or blissful to dark subject matter such as death. When examining other interactions he has in this route, and the other routes more closely though, this isn't really accurate. Koffin-K can clearly sense how scary Kara has become in this route, and will even pick up on the fact that Kara did something to the dogs to make lesser or greater dogs sad in the neutral route. Both of these show how Koffin-K can clearly pick up on more negative emotions. Most importantly though, if you attempt to kill him during the Compassion Route battle, he'll even freak out over the fact that you tried to kill him, to the point that Crossbones has to calm him down. Koffin-K's second appearance in this route is not interesting for how it shows him in a more innocent light, but rather because it shows how the Evacuation Route plays on Koffin-K's deepest fears and insecurities. Koffin-K reveals that a lizard, who is obviously implied to be Alfie's, apparently talked to him at some point, but he assumes that he scared them off, and they likely stopped communicating with Koffin-K fast. Unfortunately, this conversation isn't elaborated on at all besides this one interaction, but I think we can make some educated guesses about how it went down. Alfie's likely tried to evacuate Koffin-K, as he has been with other monsters in the area. I imagine that with Koffin-K not being very approachable in general, along with the human's imminent approach, Alfie's probably left Koffin-K to evacuate other monsters out of pressure. Since Alfie's likely gave little clarification on the underground circumstances, Koffin-K believes that Alfie's left because he scared her off. Given Koffin-K's Compassion Route battle showing how he begs Starstruck Village's locals to not run from him, this is likely devastating for him. Koffin-K's ignorance to what happened with everyone in the underground though leads him to assuming they all went somewhere without him. As previously mentioned, loneliness is one of Koffin-K's main internal conflicts. Koffin-K only being led to assume that everyone just left without inviting him likely only bolsters his insecurities of being unlikable to others. As his Compassion Route battle shows, he wants to be remembered or known for something, even if the attention he gets is negative. In the Evacuation Route though, he doesn't get anything, which likely hurts him the most. This route also shows the logical extreme of how people are generally not honest with him. Alfie tries to inform him, but due to the circumstances, he ultimately doesn't. Sans isn't even honest to his own brother, given that it seems that he's faked his death to him, so I doubt he's told Koffin-K much of anything. He's left completely alone without anyone to be honest to him about what happened in the underground. Koffin-K is honestly a character that felt daunting to attempt a thorough analysis on. He's someone that I've deeply resonated with ever since I first played through Starlight Isles, because a lot of his internal conflicts are things I've struggled with a lot in my own life. With all that said though, I think if I've come out of this analysis with anything, I think it's that Team Switch is not only good at capturing Undertale's original characters, but also phenomenal with new characters that perfectly fit the world. And my excitement for future original characters in the later areas has grown substantially. In other words, expect the 3-hour Sergeant Explosion analysis in 2 years. This twink will live strongly in our hearts and minds for at least a year after Crystal Springs drops. In all seriousness though, if you enjoyed this analysis, then consider liking this video and subscribing to get notified of any future content like this. If you have your own interpretations of Koffin-K, then feel free to leave your thoughts in the comment section down below. But other than that, take care.